as I was saying, that's a major idea in Cartesian dualism. So unlike Newton or Bacon, who's trusting the observation to be the main means by which we discern truth, Descartes rejects that because he says the senses can be deceived. We need to focus on logic. We got to focus inside the brain, inside the mind, in order to discern truth. That's Descartes. Now, Denis Diderot. So Diderot, he advocated atheism over deism. Now, this is a rather interesting thing. Now, we discussed deism a little earlier in the Enlightenment when we talked about Voltaire. So atheism goes a step further. So unlike deism, so deism says simply that that because the universe is in motion, there must have been some entity, some deity, some god, that must have set it in motion and must have designed the natural laws that govern the universe. But to a deist, whatever god they believed existed was more of a scientific concept. There must have been some first cause for everything to exist, and that this god must have set the universe in motion and given it all its natural laws, but then left it alone. They didn't believe in a god that intervened in history and things like that. Now, to an atheist, you're taking it one step further. They say, no, really, we have no proof that this God you presume exists. All we can observe is the material world. So until we can find some proof that there is a God, the atheist is operating under the assumption that there is not one. And that what exists is the material world. And we have to focus on the material world. Not material world isn't like possessions, material, but it's in the physical world. Not dealing with the supernatural or with spirits or spirituality. So that was Diderot. Now, he was the author of a volume of books called the Encyclopedia, or Encyclopedia. And it was a multi-volume book meant to contain all the world's knowledge. And he printed this en masse in order to be used for the public. So it was multi-volume. So just like you see many of the dictionaries in the back of the class, they're multi-volume. Or maybe encyclopedias, they're multi-volume. Designed to so it's the same book, but it's in multiple physical codexes, multiple physical, books. Just simply due to the volume of information being presented. Now, Immanuel Kant. Now, he was a German philosopher. So, unlike Malthus and Smith, who are Englishmen, or the rest of the gentlemen discussed, who were French, Immanuel Kant is German. And he was a proponent of absolute objective moral laws, regardless of consequences. So to Kant, one, there were objective moral laws. That means that there are moral laws that govern how we are supposed to act, and that these laws exist independent of our belief in them. So if something is the wrong thing to do, it's the wrong thing to do, regardless of whether I believe it is or I don't. Whether society punishes me for doing it or it does not. It simply is. He also believed that moral laws were absolute. So if something was wrong, it was wrong all the time. And this was regardless of consequences. When Kant first published this theory, it was not without detractors. And one famously gave him a scenario and said, well, Kant, what would you do in a case like this? So Kant famously said, lying is immoral. So I'm going to explain why in a second now first. So he said that, first of all, Kant believed that the chief moral principle is that a human being must always be an end in and of itself and never a means. Right? He believed that a human being or any rational creature, any creature of rational thought, that rationality had to be respected. And that you respected the rationality of the rational being, of the human being, by treating them always as an end in and of themselves, never as a means. So you were never supposed to be using someone merely as a tool to get something. Now, you could interact with someone in a mutually beneficial way, but you couldn't use them simply as an end, simply as a means to an end. Now, he also proposed a test of a moral law. He said, that in order to test whether you think something is or isn't a law or is or isn't an exception, you would have to will that it become a universal law. So in other words, if you're trying to answer the question, is lying okay? He said, well, here's how you figure out if it's okay to lie. If everyone lies, it's okay for everyone, so it's not just, is it okay for me to lie? There's a universal law. Is it okay for anyone to lie at any time? Well, if everyone's lying, he said, what would happen? Well, words would cease to have meaning. We wouldn't even bother speaking or asking questions because we'd have no assurance that what the other person was telling us was the truth. So he said, if you can't be universal, if you can't do it all the time like that, if it can't be the way everyone acts, then it can't be ethically allowed, even for you to do it once. That was Kant's test. And someone pointed out, well, okay, but he's like lying. So it's like, really? So they go to Kant and they say, well, suppose a scenario like this, the case of a murderer. Imagine for a moment, you guys can imagine this too. A gentleman rushes by you. Maybe it's a friend. And he says he's being chased by an axe murderer. Someone is behind him and that person wants to kill him. And confides in you that he is running to a nearby house. A few moments later, man walks up with the axe. This is the murderer. You know it. You can tell he's the murderer. Right? He walks up to you and he asks you straightforward. He's chasing this gentleman, this friend of yours, and wants to know where that guy went. What do you do as a moral person? What do you do? Now, the answer that most of us would give, the answer that this gentleman was looking for Kant to admit to, was, you'd lie. I don't know who you're talking about. I never saw him. Maybe you'd even tell him a different way to go. Oh, no, he went that way. Oh, the house is this way? Oh, no, he went that way. He went in the other direction. You missed him. Right? Why would you help a murderer seek out his victim? Kant says, no. You would tell the truth. What? Why, you ask? Well, why would anyone even recommend that? What kind of an imbecile would recommend an idea like that? Kant says, here's why. Because first of all, you can't be concerned with consequences. You have to do what your moral duty is. So regardless of what that murderer is going to do, what he does, morally or immorally, is his business, right? Whether he kills that guy or not, that's on him. That's ethically on him. As long as in this scenario you do what's moral, which he says is, it's more immoral to lie. So as long as you don't lie to him, or don't use him as a means in any way, you are morally in the clear, regardless of what he does. Whereas if you lie, you do something immoral, and then some bad consequence comes, then it's on you. So suppose, for example, you tell him to go a different direction, and he kills someone else. That's on you now. Suppose you tell him the wrong way to go, and he still manages to kill your friend. It's on you. Maybe your friend might have lived if you hadn't told the guy to go in a different direction. So he says, you can only do what's ethical for you to do. You can't be concerned with what someone else is going to do. That's on them. Now, that's a little hard. Most people today that are neo-Kantians, that are people that follow Kant's logic to this day, don't go as extreme as Kant on this one. They argue that there are certain scenarios where, yeah. Now, I'll explain how neo-Kantians get around this if you're interested. To a neo-Kantian, what he says is, well, what if you apply the exception to the test of a moral law? So, let's use the example, this one, a lie to save a life. Well, if I assume that lying is bad, that, as a general exception, if everyone was allowed to lie, but only in scenarios where it would save another person's life, how would that, well, would society break down? Would words become meaningless? No. Because it's only in a very specific situation where they're allowed that ethical exception. So he says, so many neo-Kantians have said that really, even beholding to Kant's ideas of objective moral laws, there might be exceptions to those objective moral laws, but those exceptions exist independently of us believing there, and they apply universally. So if it's okay for me to lie in order to save someone's life, it's also okay for you to lie in order to save someone's life. And it's okay for someone in Jamaica to lie to save someone's life. You get the idea. Now, the other idea that's very interesting about Immanuel Kant is he believed that contrapasso, they say an eye for an eye style justice, is more ethical than reforming someone. So, I'll give you a scenario. So, let's use an example. Not last weekend, but the weekend before, this guy in Pittsburgh, I think it was Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, murders a whole bunch of people in a synagogue. And he's arrested. And this guy has various neo-Nazi affiliations. So now imagine you're a judge and you're given two choices. Choice one, you can execute him, you can kill him. Or option two, you can reform him. You can convince him of the error of his ways and rehabilitate him. What should you do? Kant, strangely enough, would argue you should kill the guy. Kill him? He says that is actually the more ethical thing to do. Now, this isn't so weird. A lot of people argue that the death penalty is more ethical. Often they're arguing that on a scale of someone took a life, so their life should be taken in return, or they argue that it's better for society. People can break out of jail, people can lie to get out of jail, they can't revive themselves once they've been killed, stuff like that. But Kant goes at it from a whole different angle, and it's weirdly fascinating. Kant says the reason why it's more ethical is because you're honoring that person's rationality. So think back to this test of a moral law. So what he's arguing is that the way this individual acted is what they would will to be a universal law. So if a murderer essentially is acting in a way that they think that it should be okay to kill people by virtue of their rationality, to try and reform them, to try to change them, would be me using them as a means to an end. Even if that end is good, which is a safer society, I'm not respecting that they have rationally decided to kill people. I am using them as a means to make society safer. So, in Kant's view, that's wrong. Whereas if I kill them, I've now allowed them to decide ethically how they want to be treated through what they've already done. So they've decided killing people is okay. So they got killed. So I'm actually, in Kant's view, strangely, respecting the individual's rationality when I kill them. Now I should mention, this view has never really been popular with anyone. It's not popular with the families of the victims. It's not terribly popular with people on death row. It's one of those ideas that kind of just was popular with Immanuel Kant. But it's a fascinating concept. So that's why I wanted to bring it forward to you a little about Immanuel Kant. So, that ends our discussion on the various philosophes. In our future lessons, we will be diving much more in depth into the French Revolution. Viva la France!